I'm somebody that's very blessed, man, and I want to.
We all remember Prodigy as one cold, razor-sharp half of Mobb Deep's soul. But honestly, how much do we really understand about the man behind that dry, unforgiving rap voice? Prodigy was not just a rapper. He was an uncompromising artist who dared to expose the rawest truths about violence, illness, and survival, challenging both the industry and hip-hop's glossy illusions. And because of that choice, he paid a very heavy price. So what made Prodigy turn his back on fame when he was at the peak of his career? What secrets are buried inside the abandoned house he left behind? And why did an East Coast legend's life end so early? Despite everything he achieved, do not look away. We are about to step inside Prodigy's forgotten house, reveal the truth about the fortune he left behind, and trace the deeply paradoxical final chapter of an artist who survived decades of pain. The paradox of a legend and a legal time bomb. On June 20th, 2017, one half of Mobb Deep's soul, the rap legend Prodigy, passed away. Doctors concluded that the cause of death was choking on an egg while he was in the hospital being treated for a sickle cell crisis, the illness that had followed him since he was just 3 months old at a hospital in Las Vegas. An ending so unbelievable that it forces you to stop and ask, how could someone who survived decades of relentless pain be brought down by such a simple moment? He was 42 years old. At the time of his death, Prodigy left behind an estimated fortune of about $12.5 million, but without a will triggering a complex and painful legal battle among his heirs. Prodigy was born in 1974 in Hempstead, Long Island, New York. His real name was Albert Johnson. He was born into a family rich in music. His mother was a member of the legendary female group The Crystals. His father was part of the doo-wop group The Chanters. It seemed like an unshakable launchpad for Prodigy to pursue music. But ironically, fate chose to test him in the cruelest way. At just 3 months old, he was diagnosed with sickle cell disease, a rare genetic condition that primarily affects people of African descent. The illness not only put him through unbearable physical pain, it also forced him to understand early on the invisible line between Black Americans and white Americans. In the hospital, he was treated like a drug addict, not a patient. He had to scream at the top of his lungs just to get them to acknowledge his pain, and only then would nurses reluctantly come to examine him. Those were the most haunting days of his life. But the tragedy did not stop there. When Prodigy was just 10 years old, his father was sent to prison, pushing the family straight into poverty. He and his mother moved from Hempstead to Lafrac City in Queens. Eventually, they drifted into the Queensbridge housing projects, the largest public housing complex in New York. A violent environment where danger was not an exception, but a constant state of life. Through all of this, the one thing that never let go of Prodigy was his mother's determination. Wanting her son to receive a proper education and change his life, she did everything she could to get him into the Manhattan School of Art and Design. It was there that he met Kejuan Havoc Muchita, a friend who did not just walk with him into music, but became his lifelong creative partner. That meeting gave birth to the legendary name Mobb Deep. Together with Havoc, Prodigy worked relentlessly even after tasting early failure in the music market. Their breakthrough came in 1995 with the release of their second album, The Infamous. The Infamous was not just a commercial success, it was a suspended sentence against every hip-hop norm of its time. Songs like Shook One's Pot, two became instant classics. Mobb Deep rose to become one of the most successful rap groups of all time, selling over 3 million records throughout their career. After The Infamous, Prodigy was no longer a promising young rapper, but was placed directly into the elite tier of East Coast rap. He became the benchmark others were measured against. Later generations, Nas, Jay-Z, Big Pun, Wu-Tang Clan all looked to Prodigy as the standard for writing about crime paranoia and survival music that needed no polish, yet sent chills down the listener's spine. From 1996 to 2001, Mobb Deep toured nonstop. During those peak years, Prodigy could easily earn several $1 million, combined a figure many artists could only dream of in an entire lifetime. Starting in 2000, Prodigy also pursued a solo career alongside Mobb Deep. In the early 2000s, he increased his output, releasing mixtape videos experimenting with new sounds and collaborating with top producers like The Alchemist. The album Return of the Mac with The Alchemist was highly regarded by true fans, those who understood that this was not music made to please the masses. But alongside the spotlight came darker realities. Like many artists of his generation, Prodigy was pulled into the reckless lifestyle of the era. The dark side of fame. Addiction and collapse. Living your rap always comes at a cost. At 22 years old, Prodigy's life was flooded with luxury. A distorted paradise of 6-star hotels, private jets, the most expensive cars with women and weapons moving in tandem as an expected part of the package. He did not just rap about the streets, he lived in them, breathed them, and believed he controlled everything. But the bitter question is this: when a person needs weapons to feel safe, is that still power or fear wrapped in gold? And just as expected, that fast life never came without consequences. In 2003, Prodigy was arrested with a gun and marijuana. 3 years later, in 2006, things grew heavier. He was arrested again, this time with a firearm in an armored SUV worth around $120,000 after being pulled over for running a red light at 2:15 a.m. A detail that sounds almost paradoxical. The more famous and wealthy he became, the more he behaved like a man living on a battlefield, where every turn required armor and firepower. Wealth did not make him feel safer. It only made his anxiety more expensive. The consequences were unavoidable. From 2007 to 2011, Prodigy served 3.5 years in prison. Initially, he faced a mandatory 15-year sentence, but he negotiated with prosecutors to reduce it. A setback long enough to force a man to look back at his entire life trajectory from stage to cell, from spotlight to 4 cold walls. However, Prodigy later claimed that he believed he was being monitored by what he called a secret NYPD hip-hop police, a unit targeting high-profile rappers like 50 Cent. According to him, federal agents even asked him to provide information on 50 Cent, and went as far as suggesting whether he could plant guns or drugs in someone else's vehicle. While this story remains controversial, it clearly exposed his mental state at the time. Constantly tense, constantly feeling hunted, and always living in a defensive posture as a survival reflex. During his time in prison, Prodigy also admitted that long nights, endless partying, and physical exhaustion had worn down both his body and mind. On stage, he still maintained a calm and magnetic presence, but those close to him noticed the decline. His health, especially his heart, had begun to weaken. Romantic controversies. Stories never made public. Alongside the stage lights comes temptation, and Prodigy never pretended otherwise. Despite maintaining an extremely low profile in his private life, he never fully escaped questions surrounding his romantic life. Temptation follows the spotlight, and Prodigy understood that better than anyone. He rarely appeared publicly with women, never bragged about relationships, and avoided loud tabloid-style scandals. Yet it was precisely that long silence that led many fans and insiders to question what lay beneath. During years of touring, Prodigy was often absent from family life, living apart, constantly moving between New York, Los Angeles, and tour cities. People who knew him recalled a complex social life, knowing many women in the club scene and backstage environments, yet always keeping everything out of the camera's reach. These details made one thing clear: Prodigy's romantic life was far from simple or sealed off as the public image suggested. He did not show off, confess, or explain. And that absolute discretion became the source of questions that were never fully answered. The final moments of his life. The final years of Prodigy's life were not a period of escape, but an effort to return and finish what remained unfinished. After his release from prison, he went back into the studio with a completely different mindset. He wanted to give everything he had to music. But the paradox lies here. The Art of Rap tour also became the last show he ever performed before being hospitalized. And everything ended from that point on. Prodigy's passing was a major loss to the American entertainment industry. But the cold question remains: why did someone who had just returned to the stage, who had just reclaimed his voice, never get the chance to take even one more step forward? Prodigy was laid to rest with a large public memorial in New York, true to his spirit, solemn street level, and deeply Queensbridge. A farewell attended by many, yet still unable to answer the most important question. Prodigy passed away without a will. And that absence opened up a harsh reality. The distribution of his assets followed the standard American artist estate model. No emotion, no favoritism, no exceptions. Prodigy did not leave behind assets that were easy to divide. And just like his life, what remained was not arranged in a way that anyone could easily understand or control. Assets, net worth, and life. Philosophy. Unlike major rappers such as Rick Ross, who owns a 45,000 square foot property known as the Promised Land with 21 bedrooms, or Drake, who owns a mansion worth over $100 million in Toronto, Prodigy was never known for flashy real estate holdings. He lived in a quiet, luxury-style apartment in New York, not overly large, but extremely well protected. A choice that may sound modest at first, yet raises a cold question when someone has more than enough money to show off but still chooses to withdraw. Is that restraint or caution forged through too many collisions? Alongside that, in the year 2000, the press reported that Prodigy was robbed at gunpoint and lost jewelry estimated at around $343,000. It was a chilling figure, especially in the context of the early 2000s, when the value of money was very different. Without a single word of boasting, that detail alone was enough to dismantle any doubts about the true scale of his wealth at his peak. Then, there was the armored SUV worth around $120,000 a vehicle. Not meant for someone seeking attention, but for someone who constantly felt the need for protection. Then the Porsche 911 Turbo, along with other luxury cars that appeared sporadically in backstage stories. Every detail told the same thing bluntly, and without explanation. Prodigy had money. A lot of money. But his money was never used to build a glamorous stage for public consumption. That philosophy aligned remarkably well with how he wrote his music. Cold, restrained, uninterested in chasing approval. In Prodigy's mind, wealth was not the final reward, but a buffer that allowed a person to exist true to their nature in a world full of temptation and pressure. He did not chase the accumulation of real estate, nor did he turn money into an identity. What he pursued was autonomy, both artistically and personally. Because of that, when looking back at the wealth Prodigy left behind, what lingers is not a sense of awe, but a clear paradox. A man wealthy enough to live any life he wanted chose to live the most stripped-down life possible. Not because he lacked ambition, but because he understood exactly what he was fighting against. And in that fight, money was merely a tool for balance, not the destination. Cultural legacy. Prodigy's cultural legacy does not live in easily measured numbers, nor does it appear on familiar celebrity philanthropist rankings. It exists on a deeper level, where actions do not require spotlights, and where social value far outweighs financial value. If Prodigy's music career shaped a standard for street hip-hop, then what he left behind outside of music quietly shaped how an artist confronts their own community. Throughout his life, Prodigy never treated sickle cell disease as merely a personal story. He understood that the pain he carried was not an exception, but a shared experience among thousands of African American families. Instead of turning illness into spectacle or a branding tool, Prodigy chose to speak about it directly and without embellishment. He participated in talks, interviews, and events at schools and local communities, where he recounted his real hospital experiences, the moments of being doubted, neglected, and dismissed in pain. Not to seek pity, but to force listeners to confront a healthcare system that had repeatedly ignored Black bodies. These stories were not told in luxury auditoriums. They often took place in small spaces, where parents of children with sickle cell listened not to a star, but to a survivor. For them, Prodigy's presence carried more emotional value than any large donation. He did not promise miracles. He simply shared that the pain was real, the exhaustion was real, and that continuing to live was already an act of courage. That honesty helped many families feel they were not alone, and that their children were not invisible. Alongside his work related to healthcare, Prodigy devoted significant time to the hip-hop community and street youth, especially in Queens and New York City. He appeared at small shows, underground events, and informal workshops, places without VIP tickets or guest lists. There, Prodigy often participated for free or accepted very little compensation. Not because he did not need money, but because he understood that the people he was speaking to did not need polished speeches. They needed someone who had stood on major stages, but had also stood inside a prison cell, to tell them that every choice carries consequences. In those conversations, Prodigy never romanticized his life. He spoke bluntly about prison, about the loss of freedom, about decisions that seemed small, but could alter the entire trajectory of a life. He spoke about health, not only sickle cell, but physical breakdown caused by an uncontrolled lifestyle. And he spoke about violence not as a symbol of masculinity, but as a destructive loop where no one truly wins. For many young people, those words carried more weight than any official education campaign, because they came from someone who had paid a real price. An important part of Prodigy's cultural legacy lies in the book, My Infamous Life. This is not a feel-good inspirational autobiography where every mistake is wrapped in a positive lesson. The book is rough, sometimes uncomfortable, and makes no effort to please the reader. Precisely because of that, it exposes the real consequences of fame, violence, and bad decisions. In many communities, My Infamous Life has been used as an informal educational discussion resource, where readers are not guided toward a happy ending, but are forced to confront the complex reality of street life. Notably, despite his clear social contributions, Prodigy rarely appeared on lists of rapper philanthropists. The reason was not that he did not give, but that he deliberately avoided what often comes with celebrity charity. No galas, no foundation bearing his name, no oversized checks paired with press releases. According to friends and those who worked with him, Prodigy believed that if a good deed required a camera to exist, then the original motive was likely no longer pure. That perspective reflected who he truly was. Prodigy did not believe in building a legacy through titles. He believed in direct impact, even if small, even if unrecognized. To him, social value was not measured by how much money was given, but by whether the person in front of him felt heard. That is also why many of his contributions were only spoken about after his death through the stories of those he helped. Looking back at the entire journey, Prodigy's cultural legacy stands as a clear counterpoint to performative celebrity charity. He did not leave behind a fund bearing his name, but he left stories that changed how others viewed illness, violence, and personal responsibility. He did not buy recognition with money, but built respect through genuine presence. And that is why Prodigy's legacy, though quiet, remains deeply rooted in the community he belonged to. In a world where value is often measured by easily visible numbers, Prodigy chose to leave behind the hardest thing to measure: lasting impact on people. That is why, even though he no longer stands on stage, his voice continues to echo in places without spotlights exactly the way he lived and the way he believed. The abandoned house, a symbol. Prodigy's house was never built to become a symbol. It was not designed to impress, not the kind of property the press chased or fans gathered outside to photograph. Yet it was precisely that quiet nature that ultimately turned the house into something that spoke for the entirety of Prodigy, as a person more clearly than any rap verse or interview ever could. During his lifetime, Prodigy lived in a modest and discreet space. No mansion, no tall gates, no display of power or wealth. His home carried the true spirit of quiet luxury, a kind of refinement meant only for those inside, not for public display. The interior was not elaborate, but it had depth. Objects were chosen for their function, not their ability to impress. Music was everywhere. Vinyl records, cassette tapes, unfinished recordings, notebooks filled with rap lyrics. Alongside them were books. Books about history, spirituality, illness, and society. The space did not resemble a celebrity home, but rather a refuge, a place where someone needed silence to survive after all the noise outside. That house reflected exactly how Prodigy viewed the world. He did not seek validation through architecture. He did not need a building to declare victory. To him, a home only needed to be safe, private, and real. It was where he could shed the role of a legend and return to being a man carrying illness memory and unanswered questions. Within that space, Prodigy lived the part of his life few ever saw: a life without stages, without lights, and without an audience. But everything changed after the most important woman in his life passed away. His mother, his emotional anchor, and the final thread holding that house together, was gone. From that point on, the once warm space began to deteriorate, not because of a lack of money, but because of a lack of care. Rooms once filled with music grew silent. Bookshelves were no longer opened. The house slowly disappeared from the public narrative, much like the way Prodigy himself avoided media attention while he was alive. That decline did not happen loudly. It happened quietly, the way time usually works. No scandal, no public disputes surrounding the house. Just a slow forgetting. Few people mentioned it, few people asked questions. And there was no clear effort to preserve a space once tied to one of the most important voices in East Coast hip-hop. In a world where legacy is often cast in concrete and bronze plaques, Prodigy's house drifted outside collective memory. It is precisely here that the house becomes a symbol. Not just a neglected physical asset, but a condensed image of silence within a family, and the indifference of time. No one spoke loudly enough to keep it. No one held enough power to turn it into a museum. And perhaps no one truly understood that the house did not need preservation for its real estate value, but because it was the only place Prodigy ever allowed himself to live fully. The harsh truth is that not every legend is preserved with bricks and stone. Some exist only in memory and music, and in the voids they leave behind. Prodigy's house in its forgotten state unintentionally makes that truth clearer than any tribute ever could. It reminds us that greatness does not guarantee preservation, and that without someone stepping forward to protect it, even the spaces carrying the deepest emotional value can disappear without a trace. What is worth reflecting on is that Prodigy likely understood this very early on. He never built a legacy expecting it to be physically framed. He did not prepare a house to become a monument. He prepared music words and lived experience to pass on. The house to him was only a tool, and when that tool was no longer used, it accepted being consumed by time, just as he always accepted reality, no matter how harsh. That is why when the story begins with the image of that silent house and ends in the same place, the circle closes in a cold but precise way. The house opens the video like a door into Prodigy's private life, and the house closes the story as a reminder that not every legend leaves behind a monument. Some leave only memory, and that memory is the one thing that can never be abandoned. Conclusion and open question. When all the lights have gone out, when the music no longer echoes on stage, what remains after Prodigy is not silence, it is a void. A void large enough to force us to confront the final question his life leaves behind. The money is still there, the music is still there, and a house standing quietly in New York is still there. But the man is not. Prodigy passed away, leaving behind a fortune many would envy. He left behind recordings that became benchmarks, songs that need no introduction, verses embedded in the subconscious of an entire generation. He left behind a house, not a flashy mansion, but a private living space, tied to memory music and years few ever witnessed. On paper, his legacy can be listed item by item, but the issue is that not everything can be preserved through paperwork. The real question begins here. What truly deserves to be kept? Is value found in the money left in accounts in a music catalog that continues to generate revenue? Or in the memories tied to a man who lived, endured, and chose a very specific way of existing? A house can be transferred. A song can keep playing. But are those enough to say that a legend is still being honored? The silence surrounding Prodigy's house after his death is not just physical decay. It is a symbol of a larger paradox. A man once celebrated on stage, whose voice carried real weight in hip-hop culture, could gradually be forgotten within his own living space. Not because he was not big enough, but because the way society measures value often leaves no room for things that do not generate immediate profit. The story becomes even more complex when looking at Prodigy's romantic life and the children he left behind. His personal magnetism was undeniable. Fame, power, and symbolic status in hip-hop made Prodigy a constant center of attention. Women were drawn to him not only for money, but for the image of a cold, experienced man carrying the stories of the street and survival. But that same magnetism also laid the groundwork for long-lasting consequences. The common thread in Prodigy's personal life was fragmentation. Multiple relationships, multiple women, and multiple children with different mothers. not a traditional family structure, but parallel lives existing at the same time, rarely truly intersecting. In that context, the role of a frequently absent father became a difficult reality to avoid, not necessarily from a lack of responsibility, but because the rhythm of fame touring and unstable years gradually eroded the ability to be fully present. The consequence of that absence was childhoods marked by disconnection, children growing up with the name Prodigy as a symbol, but without enough time, memory, or closeness to understand the man behind the name. While Prodigy was alive, that void could be softened by the idea of his presence somewhere in the future. But when he passed suddenly, that void became permanent. And it is here that questions of entitlement, legacy, and who receives what begin to surface, not only as legal matters, but as the inevitable outcome of a fragmented life. Looking back on Prodigy's entire journey from music fame and money to his personal life, one large question slowly emerges. How are we measuring the value of a human being? By what remains after they die? Or by how they lived while they were here? A legend may leave behind millions of dollars, dozens of albums, and a house. But if those things exist detached from the living memory of the real person, what meaning do they hold beyond numbers? Prodigy's story does not close with a complete ending. It stops at an open question left for those who remain. If a legend can be forgotten inside his own house, if money and fame are not enough to keep memory alive, then what criteria are we truly using to measure human value? And when it is each of our turns to leave what will truly remain to be called a legacy?
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.